Hi, I'm Chris Barrett.
And I'm George Roberts. Welcome to NEPA Focus.
NEPA Focus is a program that takes a look at issues related to the towns and the folks here in Northeastern Pennsylvania.
Our topic on the show is affordable housing.
Welcome to NEPA Focus. I'm Chris Barrett. For our first topic, we have chosen housing, a broad topic to be sure, and a complicated one. But when folks think about housing, it conjures up many feelings. It's a feeling of being their safe place, their mark of success in achieving the American dream, and it's their family. What cuts at the heart of housing is the plight of the folks who can't find housing, and when they find it, they just can't afford it. So we have some folks here to walk us through housing. And the first person is Michael Tekiva, President and CEO of the Pocono Mountains United Way, and Bob Durkin, who is President and CEO of the Greater Scranton Chamber of Commerce. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here on NEPA Focus. We're so happy to have you. Michael Tekiva, let me start with you. We hear a lot of definitions related to housing. Many. I think the two that we hear the most are affordable and workforce housing. In your view, what do they mean?
Great question. And it really is the tone that we want to set with the definitions. Workforce housing simply means that people can work and live in the same community. It's not the amount of money that it costs to live there. It is the bookkeeper that works at a local towing company living in their community. It is the scrub nurse that is working in their community and living there. All of those folks are able to live and work in their community. Affordable housing sometimes gets confused with subsidized housing or subsidized rental, but it's not. Affordable simply means it's an equation based on how much money you make and what's your cost of living to buy that home. Affordable is that you are not spending more than 30% of your income on your housing.
So Bob Durkin, the workforce definition, do you agree?
I do. And it's interesting, side note here, chambers of commerce traditionally haven't necessarily ventured into the whole housing area. But it really comes down to, from the chamber perspective and the business community's perspective, workforce. So what you have now is a situation where, historically, as we do economic development in the chamber, and we do it, marketing and trying to attract people, businesses, and organizations to invest in Northeastern Pennsylvania. And it used to always be about, do you have the land? Do you have incentives? Now it's, do you have a workforce? And of course, we have some of the lowest unemployment rates that we've had in history, which means it's now a tightened workforce. So as we think about it from the business perspective, we have to do everything we can to give these individuals, the potential employees and existing employees, an opportunity to make a good living and to be able to live, work, and play in their communities.
So Michael, in your opinion, is there a crisis?
There is, and this is a national problem, but we obviously feel it locally. Volume. We need volume. We need low-income housing, we need middle-income housing, we need high-end housing. We need single-family housing, and we need high-density housing. That is something that will alleviate the problems, because one of the things that we've seen at the United Way is that folks that can afford more will sometimes have to buy at a lower level simply because there isn't enough middle-income housing. But that then puts pressure on the lower part of the bell curve. So any type of housing development would be good housing for us.
You mentioned high density. Define high density housing.
Where folks are living in areas, in apartment complex or condos that are allowing folks to live in closer proximity. Mixed use housing in that sense, where we're inviting the business community to also be a part of the living environment for folks.
So this question kind of can really apply to both of you. And according to the nonprofit Housing Advocacy Association Up for Growth, from their report that was released for 2023, housing underproduction, or when communities fall short of housing needs, is getting worse. Nationally, underproduction increased to nearly 3% to 3.9 million missing homes, and it's spreading geographically, they note. The number of counties across the U.S. experiencing underproduction increased 32%. So we're seeing that here?
Absolutely. It's definitely seen, and probably, Bob, you can talk about that more.
Yeah, I mean, it is a national trend, and it began a long time ago. This is decades of underbuilding, and there's no single answer. I'll go back to what Michael said before. What you need is mixed use, mixed opportunities. So you have single, multifamily buildings, again, all of them, it's different. If it's in a dense urban area, it should be some type of housing, certain type of housing. Other areas where there's a little bit more room, you can build in a different level. What really also comes into play here is the age of existing housing. So the idea isn't just building new housing, it's the opportunity to renovate existing homes. So there's a movement at the national level for funding the Neighborhood Home Assistance or Investment Act, and it's still in Congress. And this would provide tax credits for developers or individuals to be able to do renovations to existing housing. So, it's not just building anew. It's taking advantage of what already exists and making that more palatable to that worker housing level of investment.
Housing is such a critical element of life. It is the place where our kids are doing their homework around the kitchen table. It's where they're making memories at holidays. And we also see, though, that housing has an impact on education, on healthcare, on economic stability and growth of a community. It has an effect on social cohesion of families not being transient and building their roots into a community. And that really matters for folks to have that place to call home. And so something that we're always concerned about is that 2 out of 5 households are not finding affordable housing right here in the Poconos.
And I want to make a distinction here between rental housing and permanent housing. In your opinion, is there any distinctions and differences there based upon just the general comments that both of you have made?
Well, I think it's important to have both. We live in a community that should have multiple options. Thriving communities have multiple options, from their restaurants to their type of employer and their education. In that same way, housing has to provide multiple options because some do find it more attractive to rent and others want to purchase. But the fact that folks are not able to find anything that's affordable, whether it's rental or to purchase, that's where we're pursuing the opportunities.
There's a really neat kind of a model in Lackawanna County, named Ken Powell of Archbold, who basically has done the development where he's got single-family homes, got multi-family homes of 2 different levels, and basically has created a really interesting little community. And that's the balance. That's what we need to have spread across not just one little community like that, but all throughout Northeastern Pennsylvania.
Every time we bring up this topic, we have just folks generally saying, why should I care about housing? My housing is stable. I'm very happy. What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I think it's important to all of us, to that idea of community. We need to care about the one anothering and the well-being of our neighbors, because that does have an impact on us, whether it's the impact on our businesses, on our quality of life, on education. We need to care about one another in that sense, because we all do well, we all do better when we all do better.
Bob, I'm going to give you the last word on
Stable housing is a stable community. It's absolutely a foundational aspect of not just quality of life, but of a strong local economy.
Michael Tekiva, Bob Durkin, thank you so much for being with us. We were so happy to have you in this first edition of NEPA Focus, and we'll be right back with more.
The More Front Doors Pocono Housing Summit will examine housing issues and promoting sustainable development, affordability, and community-focused solutions. Join us as area leaders address housing challenges, move towards implementing innovative solutions, and foster collaboration among industry leaders, policymakers, and community stakeholders. More Front Doors, the Pocono Housing Summit, Wednesday, November 20th, 12 noon till 6:30. at the Kalahari Resorts and Conventions. Go to PoconoMountains.com/Pocono Housing Summit for more details.
Welcome back to our program. I'm George Roberts. Joining me now, we have Tom Campbell, who is Director of Housing Initiatives for the Pocono Mountains United Way, and Leslie Perriman, Director of Crossroads Community Services Street to Feet Outreach Center, located in Monroe County. Great to have you both with us today. Let's dive right into affordable housing. Let's define that. What is affordable housing when we talk about it?
Affordable housing has sort of gotten a bad rep. People have been associating it with low-income housing, a place where people really don't want to hang out. But in reality, affordable housing is housing you can afford, literally. The way we typically look at that is are you spending a total of about 30% of your household income on your housing costs? your rent or your mortgage, your taxes, and your utilities. If you're spending more than that, your housing really isn't affordable. And in the most part, even people who are making what we might consider a good income are actually living in houses that aren't truly affordable for them.
Now, you mentioned 30% of your income. You're talking about your gross income, but it's not just the rent. It's also the utilities that go into it. So if you're making $50,000 a year, you're bringing that home, you're talking what, about $15,000 on?
Somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah,
but then,
that's
of course,
not easy.
divide that by 12. Yes, you've got a number that is not going to cover a lot of rent. In fact, actually won't cover one of today's mortgages either.
Let's talk a little bit about Street to Feet, the outreach center. Leslie, you are involved with adults who are homeless.
Yes.
What do you see out there in Monroe County?
I see people who are either becoming homeless because they can't afford to live where they were living for a variety of different reasons, or they can't get off the streets because they can't afford to move into an available rental apartment or home or afford a mortgage because of the costs. So things have gotten a little out of reach for a lot of folks these days.
So what do we do for those people? I mean, how do we get them off the street and into something? I mean, I guess they're going to need help.
Mm-hmm. So at Street to Feet, we're helping them look for employment, and employment that will offer them an affordable income.
So that's step one.
That's step one.
They need money coming in.
You need to, in order to get off the streets, you need some form of money, some form of income. The affordable housing, Section 8 public housing, any income-based type of housing, there's lots of waiting lists and long waiting lists. So that's not an immediate option. But trying to be creative, do you have a friend or two that you can pull your resources together? Can we look at shared type of housing? Can we look at what other ways that we can help get you off the street? Is there a friend, family member, somebody that you know that you can go and live with until you get back on your feet?
You talked about the size of families are different today than they were so many years ago. You used to have like 5 people in a home.
One of the things that is interesting is back in the 80s or even earlier, when a lot of the homes around here were built, we were looking at a normal family size, nuclear family of 2 kids, 3 kids, mom and dad, maybe grandma lived with. So it was a number of people in the house. Well, now families are smaller. So it may be the same number of people in the United States, but each household is smaller. There's also more seniors, and each one of those seniors is now in a whole house, but they're only using one room in it. So what that comes down to is we have the same number of people as before, but we have more individual households, but we don't have more houses. So consequently, they haven't kept up. And while there have been houses built over the last 20, 30, 40 years, the rate of increase in the number of houses hasn't increased with the number of households that we now have.
And when we're talking about the Poconos, we are affected just like the rest of the nation. We have not kept up with more available housing in the area. So what do we do? How do we change that? I know we have, some homes that aren't being used right now in certain areas, but not every area of the Poconos is going to accommodate people that need affordable housing, because if you need affordable housing, you probably also need to be close to transportation, close to a job, correct?
In some cases, yes. I mean, keep in mind, affordable to you is different than affordable to me, and different than affordable to Tom, and vice versa.
Yeah.
But a lot of the folks that are renting, they need to be accessible to resources, public transportation, employment, grocery stores, doctor's offices, and things like that. You're not going to be able to do that out in Kunkletown or up in Cobalt Township. So that makes it a little bit more challenging as well.
So when we talk about looking for areas that we could maybe have more affordable housing, it's ideal to look at more populated areas, such as the boroughs. You look at Stroudsburg, you look at Milford, Honesdale, maybe Jim Thorpe, Lehighton, Palmerton, those kind of places in Carbon County. That's really what we need, correct? You need something that is in those areas. So when we start looking at areas, is that what we do?
It's part of the solution, but it's not the total solution. I come from a corporate background where economics are sort of the bread and butter of things. Supply and demand. So effectively, if there were more houses overall of all price ranges, that would reduce the pressure. Part of the problem we have is the fact that there's this many houses and this many people, but there are a number of people at the high end that could afford something really, really nice, and yet we don't have quite enough of it. And yes, there's a number of people at the low end, who really can't afford, and they're the ones who are spending 50, even 60% of their total income on housing, on something they can't really afford. And what that leaves in the middle is this tiny little space of workforce housing, where houses that are sort of a middle price or apartments that are middle price really aren't available to those who have the money and the income to live in them, whether they work at the local restaurant or the Home Depot or whatever the case might be. They don't have places because it's encroached upon by the high end and the low end. So we do need to focus on both of those extremes to hopefully open up the middle.
How do we get the affordable housing we need? In other words, what kind of incentives can be done for people that are constructing them or renovating existing homes? What do we do?
So I believe that to a great extent, the high end I spoke of, the market will take care of itself. As it sees a need to build high expensive houses, that will take care of itself. The low end is a place where we have to really focus our efforts. And there are a number of tools that the government makes available to developers to make affordable housing where the rents are going to be more fixed. The difficulty is that they're mostly focused on large apartment complexes, and they don't necessarily fit well here in small town Pennsylvania, because we don't have the water, we don't have the sewer, we don't have places to do that. So it's a little bit more of a challenge. One of the things that we also don't have is, and although there is funding for smaller projects, we don't have any organizations, nonprofit organizations, that can use funding, state level funding, to build just a 10-unit to senior housing or disabled person's housing. We don't have those kinds of organizations here that are focused on those things.
Leslie, what about, landlords working with renters? I mean, maybe they can have a little leeway with what they're asking for their place.
That would be wonderful. I mean, if you have an individual who can afford to pay $1,500 as opposed to $1,800, be open to willing to work with those individuals that maybe can afford that lower rate, knowing that they're going to be able to afford that. Whereas somebody might say that they're going to be able to afford $1,800, but 3-6 months down the road, they're not going to be able to afford that anymore because of rising costs. So being open to that.
The big picture is, and Leslie gets credit for it, sustainable. What we're looking for is, yes, we want to find solutions that we can make changes to our environment, our landscape, so that we have the right organizations to build, that we can attract other developers and get more houses either renovated or built. But big picture is we need sustainable solutions, because effectively, if we build something and we keep the cost down as an introductory price, but we know that later on it's going to go right back up again, we haven't really solved the problem.
I agree just with that very sentiment. We want people to, to live here, work here, and be part of this community. And it's hard to do that when you can't afford things. So if we can build in solutions to help people from those who are low income to those who have a higher income bracket be able to sustainably and affordably live in our community and be part of our community, that's the best solution that we can possibly think of.
Leslie Perryman, Tom Campbell, thanks for being with us. We've got more coming up in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to NEPA Focus. I'm George Roberts. Pennsylvania is among a dozen states in the Appalachian region, historically the highest poverty levels in the country. Now, this contributes to a variety of problems, including the lack of affordable housing. A 1964 report commissioned by President Lyndon Johnson referred to Appalachia, or the area surrounding the Appalachian Mountains, as a region apart, as the entire region has lagged economically and continues to do so. In offering explanations for the weak economic conditions in Central Appalachia, many have placed the blame on low levels of education, poor health care, over-reliance on coal, and even the region's culture. The U.S. government created the Appalachian Regional Commission, or ARC, in 1965. Now, for nearly 60 years, the ARC has implemented thousands of programs aimed at promoting economic development throughout the region. Now, today, ARC maintains 5 distinct investment priorities: business development, education, workforce training, critical infrastructure, and leveraging the region's natural resources to boost tourism. Unfortunately, the region continues to lag behind the rest of the country. Joining me now is State Senator Rosemary Brown and Nicole Murray with the Pocono Mountains Association of Realtors. Great to have you both with us. Appalachian region, they say we're in it here in the Poconos. Do you feel that that's accurate?
I do feel it's accurate. I think it's, no matter where you are, in the state of Pennsylvania that we're speaking about today, I mean, you could fit that with that description, I think. But I do believe we are in that region, in that description also very strongly.
Do you feel that it's always been a problem as far as affordable housing here in the Poconos? Has it always been an issue? I mean, because we are a tourism area.
It has always been a problem, but I think you have seen that cost of living really go up dramatically over the last 10 years or so, 15 years. So I like to really refer to it as attainable housing.
It's a different term.
It is. I do, because I think a lot of times when people hear affordable, their mindset goes to a total different type of housing. When you say attainable, you say a type of housing that the normal person, working hard, family, doing their best to attain the home ownership is the goal. And a lot of people can't get there because of the cost of things, and we can talk further about that as we go.
Yeah.
But that also goes into rentals, because some of these costs that we're talking about also play strongly into the rental market. And I'll let Nicole probably do a little bit on this as well.
Nicole, how do you feel, or how do you see this from the Association of Realtors, the affordable housing situation here in the Poconos?
So, and we talk about this all the time. We have an inventory shortage, so affordable housing definitely is an issue, but it's attainable housing. It's housing in general. It's all price brackets. It's not just lower level homes.
Like, why is that? Why are we having a problem?
A lot of different factors. So if you look at since the housing market and like the foreclosure crisis or whatever you want to call it in the mid 2000s, late 2000 or 2010, that area, builders stopped building. So we had years worth of, you couldn't build for what you could buy a resale for, and like you just couldn't afford to do that.
I think one of the things too, even just this morning, I had a senior expo, and it was a very interesting scenario. You have a senior who's remaining in a home that is way too large for them. And financially, that's not a great thing for them because their resources on their financial is dwindled down so that they have nowhere to go for senior housing. So when you talk about attainable, affordable senior housing, so by the senior not moving out of that home, going into a place that's more appropriate and something they really want, you don't have that inventory of the larger home that might be for the new family to go into or whatever else it may be. So it's sort of a domino effect when you try to get the right housing for each stage in your life. If you don't have it for, a certain job, if you don't have it for, the family, if you don't have it for the senior, they trickle down and it affects the whole arena of housing, which is huge.
And add in historically low interest rates, right? Like, people don't want to leave their 2.99% mortgage.
Right, not now.
So
much, yeah.
because of what the rates are now.
We talked about this earlier, you and I, Nicole, about why can't we take some existing buildings like in a downtown area like Strasburg or East Strasburg or Holmesdale or Milford, Jim Thorpe. You take some of these buildings, maybe they're not being utilized anymore. They're empty. They're in a great location because they're in a downtown area where people who are in that situation can get around and get to places and things. I don't need as much transportation or have easier access to transportation. Is it as easy as finding a building and just renovating it, or is that not practical?
I wish it was. And there's a lot of people out there that are trying to solve for this, right? We've got amazing developers in the area. We're working on, public-private partnerships are probably a key to a lot of this. Getting through the regulation, getting through the cost, when you're looking at some of these older buildings, it has to make sense financially, unless we're able to find grant funding that's going to offset some of that. So we are looking at that. Everybody, Housing Authority, the county commissioners, we talk a lot about what are the different options.
Rosemary, is this where lawmakers come in and maybe can make policy changes to allow for some of these things to happen?
Yeah, I think some of it you have, your local ordinances within your local governments being able to do certain things with commercial turning to residential and kind of a mixed use. The Pennsylvania Housing Authority does some things where we put money into the public-private partnership to make those numbers work. And then you may have a mixed type of rent in there. You may have someone who's paying a subsidy. You may have somebody who's being subsidized and somebody who's paying a full rent. And those make the numbers work for the developer. And that's part of the difficult conversation is how do you make those numbers work so the investor will come in and do it? You create the housing you need, and you also create the rate of the housing that you need, the attainable or the affordable housing.
And the big question is, what if we do nothing? What would the future look like?
Great question. We expect some kind of market correction with pricing within the next few years. There's so many outside factors that influence housing, so the economy is a big piece of that. We'll see where we go with things. We have to do something. Like there's people that need housing. We don't have the ability to provide it for everybody here. Workforce housing we talk about all the time. We're a tourist area. We need to be able to help, the people that live here and that have been here and that want to stay here, find a place that's affordable for them, so not necessarily affordable housing per se, but affordable for all income brackets. Everybody needs a roof.
We are short of employees. We are short of having the people that we need to live in our region, to support the tourism, to support all of our companies and our jobs. So we have to figure it out. We got to get to those details that will make it happen.
State Senator Rosemary Brown and Nicole Murray with the Pocono Mountains Association of Realtors, thanks for being with us. NEPA Focus continues in a moment. We'll be right back. The More Front Doors Pocono Housing Summit will examine housing issues and promoting sustainable development, affordability, and community-focused solutions. Join us as area leaders address housing challenges, move towards implementing innovative solutions, and foster collaboration among industry leaders, policymakers, and community stakeholders. More Front Doors, the Pocono Housing Summit, Wednesday, November 20th, 12 noon till 6:30. at the Kalahari Resorts and Conventions. Go to PoconoMountains.com/Pocono Housing Summit for more details.
Hi, everybody, we're back, and I'm very happy to have with us right now two folks who know a lot about the business climate here in Northeastern Pennsylvania, specifically in the Pocono Mountains. These two gentlemen are general managers of some of our biggest resorts here. Camelback, Dave, so great to have you. Don from Kalahari. So thank you, gentlemen, both for being here today. We're very pleased to have you. And one of the things we want to ask right off the top, what does workforce housing mean, and do we have an issue with it? Dave, I'm going to ask you first, if that's okay.
Sure. For me, workforce housing is finding that sweet spot for folks that are in the service sector, making $18, $20 an hour, mid-level managers making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, and having them have affordable housing that is in close proximity to work so that they're not having to commute and add an hour in each end of their day to try to get to a place that they can afford.
So, Don, is that a problem in the Pocono Mountains?
It's absolutely a problem, Chris, and Dave is right, is making sure that there is adequate housing for our associates that are working in the service industry with us, those $18 to $25, $26 an hour employees, but also for our managers that are working for us as well. I mean, Poconos has a huge hospitality footprint and lots of tourism, and we have to have a great workforce if we're going to continue to really grow our industry.
And that's one thing I wanted to ask to both of you, or Don, I'll start with you, to Dave, with you. Do you think that it's a challenge to recruit industry here because we don't have the adequate workforce housing?
It is a challenge, and one of the first things that happens when you're talking to a potential associate or employee is, where am I going to be able to live? We just recently hired a chef for one of our restaurants. So he's a salary employee making a good wage, and he's working hard to try to find a good place for his family. He's found a place, luckily. He's in a school district that's very good, that's very important, but he struggled to find a good place to live. And that's with every single level of employee that we have.
Dave, how about with you folks?
Very, very similar story. Most recently, I have in mind a story about somebody who actually accepted a job offer, was relocating from out of state, just naturally assumed that it would be affordable cost of living to come to the Pocono Mountains, and he actually ended up rescinding the offer.
No, that's very difficult when you find somebody who's really going to fit into your organization and then they can't live here. And what option do they have? They drive an hour and a half? I mean, that's not really, if you're going to work 8-10 hour day and then you're going to put another 3 hours on your day, that's not an option.
And if there's a family involved, exactly.
Yeah, very difficult.
So it becomes a quality of life issue then.
That's right.
It's completely a quality of life. And Chris, the thing about housing, when we talk about affordable housing and such, it's got to be quality housing as well. I mean, our people deserve to have a very good place to live, a comfortable place to live where they can raise their families. And that's how we're going to have long-term associates, whether they're hourly associates that's been working at the resort for the 9 years it's been open, or new managers like Dave's trying to hire right now.
So, gentlemen, one thing is we attended the ESU, East Stroudsburg University Economic Summit recently in May of 2024. We did catch up and had the occasion to speak with some business leaders in the community. Here's what they had to say about housing.
The borough of Stroudsburg is landlocked at this time. There's no more new land for new development, so we have to get really creative. So we're looking at passing a LERTA ordinance. Essentially, if you think small business on the first floor, residential on the second, third, and fourth, I'm happy to say that we're able to go to a fifth story now, so any new construction or renovations, we got that ordinance passed to increase the building height because we have nowhere else to go but up.
Hey, so we want to check in with folks on the front lines of hospitality and the economy here in the Pocono Mountains. I'm with Don with Kalahari Resorts and Conventions. You guys have a huge workforce here, Don, and there's such a need for housing in this area. Tell me, what are some of the most critical parts of that need right now for the people who work here in this industry?
We do have a huge labor force. We swell up to about 1,700 associates during peak season. And because of the need for, we've done several things here at the company. Number one, we bring in international students because we don't have the labor supply right here that we can rely on. And we also have built 300 bed and associate housing for these people to stay in.
So we're joined up now with Dawn Hard. Dawn and her husband run Bulldog Liquidators. You guys have this business model where it's a retail place and you have employees, but as you were just saying to me, those employees do not live near where your facility is. Tell me what's led up to that.
Well, we originally hired, folks when we started in 2018, and we were down in the West End area of Monroe County, and people were fairly local to that, but then we expanded and went into Mount Pocono, which is a little further north. So we wanted to maintain the employment of those employees and give them, long-term employment. And so a few of them wanted to move into the area, but have not been able to really find a place to go. And then we're further expanding into Pike. And so we, again, want to maintain that workforce, right? And, continue to support their employment over the long term. We don't want to have a turnover. And also hire more people, but that's been very difficult and becomes even more difficult even in Pike.
Hi everyone, I'm here with Jen Picenti. Jen, you're in higher education with Lackawanna College, Lake Region campus there at the Hawley Silk Mill, but also president of the Pike County Chamber of Commerce. You represent so many different businesses throughout Pike County, and we're talking about housing when it comes to putting people out into the workforce or trying to attract new businesses to Pike County. What's kind of that impediment when it comes to housing? Is there just not enough right now to grow business in a way?
Well, yeah, we're facing a multitude of dilemma. Not only do we need enough housing to supply people coming into the area, but we need the businesses to come into the area and the housing there to supply it. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword on both areas.
So we've now shifted our focus to Carbon County, and Jerry McAward has an outdoor recreation-based business on the Lehigh River down there. 110 or so employees, full and part-time. Jerry, what are some of the hurdles those employees face and other employers face in Carbon County and the Poconos when it comes to housing?
I think to a large degree the area is in tourism-related businesses, outdoor recreation is a large employer. We try to pay as much as we can pay to keep people, but I don't think most of those salaries and pays and part-times afford enough money to afford a full housing. So many people live with other people. Many of our staff live with their families at home. They're adults, they live at home.
Gentlemen, your reactions to those comments from folks at the ESU Summit. Dave first.
So I would say we're living parallel lives, very much relate to the same story. And I'll tell you that I think it's actually getting more challenging. As we look through this post-COVID world, that there's been some additional challenges with the whole housing situation. Many more short-term rentals are here in the market now, so that's reduced the amount of inventory. There's a lot of people that made a decision in the urban areas like Philadelphia and New York to work remotely, so they have bought homes here in the region now with a high interest rate. So I think that we're finding that the challenge is becoming even greater for affordable housing.
So Don, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with Dave. And it's what's really interesting here is what has to come first, the chicken or the egg? Do we have to invest in housing so business will come here, or do we do what's happening right now is business is coming here and we're struggling through housing? I think we're already behind the 8 ball a little bit on this, and now we just really have to focus on getting good housing for people to come here to support this industry.
Do you feel that having workforce and affordable housing being part of the strategy to attract industry in is a good thing for Northeastern Pennsylvania?
So luckily, the company that I work for, we were able to go ahead and build our own 300-bed associate housing building so that we can bring people in to work during the peak periods or in the difficult jobs to hire people into. And so that gives me an advantage over Dave and some of the other businesses in the area. But that just speaks to the void that we have in this entire area. If we build 300-bed housing and we fill it immediately, what is the demand like out there?
So Dave, say you're in a little bit of a different situation, not on-site, but you've had challenges as well, correct? I mean, and you folks have been pretty innovative in trying to help that situation.
Well, we have. We don't have on-site workforce housing. The only solution that we have is partnering with a local motel to accommodate short-term temporary staff, whether it's the international J1 students or just other folks that come and help us at the peak winter and summer season. So that's as good as it gets. So we are relying on the need for that affordable housing in the local community. And it's vital to not only sustaining the current level of business, but to have hopes for any kind of growth in our region, right? And we're excited. There's talk of the train coming in a couple of years, and that should open up additional traffic to the region. Governor Shapiro and all his efforts on business development and opening the doors, not only to tourism, but to industry in general for this region. So there's a lot at stake here.
Do you feel that the lack of workforce and affordable housing has hurt in us attracting diverse industries to the Pocono Mountains? Dave, I'll start with you.
I absolutely do. It's back to the chicken or the egg conundrum, right? And the lack of it is limiting the options for employers. I mean, would we like another Sanofi or another large employer like that in this region? Yes. And from a diversity standpoint for our economy, I mean, to have all your eggs in one basket with tourism is a limiting factor for any community. So we absolutely need this workforce housing.
So Don, you'll get the last word on this segment. What are your feelings on that?
Well, Chris, if you think back over the 9 years that Kalahari has been here, which is we just passed 9 years in July. Since that, Camelback opened up a water park, built a lodge, Great Wolf has expanded, Swiftwater has come to town. All of the growth has been primarily in the hospitality industry. If you're in Mount Pocono and you drive towards Mount Pocono, all the development is on the resort side of the town. Our industry drives growth. It drives growth in other industries as well. Shipping, the supply industry, retail industry, but you're not seeing a tremendous amount of growth in this area. And one of the main reasons is because you don't have a workforce. We have to find a viable solution to attracting great people to come live here. We can attract people to come here and work here. We don't have that problem. This is a great place to live. I love living here. Dave and I have talked about this many times. He loves living here as well. But it's not a great place to live if you can't find a good place to live in.
Well, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank you both for being here today on the business perspective on housing. Again, thank you so much, Dave and Don. I'm Chris Barrett for NEPA Focus. We'll be right back. I'm Chris Barrett. Welcome back to NEPA Focus as we continue to delve into housing in Northeastern Pennsylvania. I'm so happy to welcome with me right now Shane Powers from NeighborWorks and Mayor Cognetti, the Mayor of Scranton. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. We've been talking a little bit before this segment. We've been getting educated through this whole process of finding out why housing is such a challenge in Northeastern Pennsylvania. So you two really are where the rubber hits the road in a lot of different ways. So if I could start with you, Mayor. Shane, we'll bring you in a little bit. But Mayor, why should we be concerned that there's a lack of affordable and workforce housing in our market?
This is a problem that is pervasive across the whole country. It's not unique to Northeastern Pennsylvania, but if somebody isn't able to get the type of housing they need, they're not able to meet the other basic needs, right? They're not maybe able to have a stable way to get to work. Maybe they're not able to work in the place that they want to work at. Their income level isn't at the place that they want it to be for their family. And then there's all of the knock-on effects from that, right, that we would see in a city where people aren't getting the access to the healthcare, the food that they need. The education system suffers, and our kids suffer because they're not in the school district that their family wants to be in. So there's all sorts of effects that happen, that domino effect of not having the right housing and not having enough housing, that people think that, okay, well, we have a stagnant population. We don't see that in Scranton. We see a growing population, and we see census numbers that do not tell the whole story. We have folks that are doubling up with 2 families in a single family home. Some of those types of things that are really putting pressure on our whole economic system in a place like Northeastern Pennsylvania. We've got to get more units built. We've got to get more units built, not just for our families and our school-age kids, but also for our aging population. You have folks that are still living in that single-family home where they raise their kids. They don't need 4 bedrooms. They would like to potentially be on a single level. We don't have enough single-level homes to be able to age in place. So we're lacking housing not just in what people think of when they think of low income or affordable housing. We're lacking units in all types of shapes and sizes.
Well, both of you have been really integral in community leadership and bringing this problem to the fore. And Mayor, I want to get back to you on that, but Shane, NeighborWorks has been doing quite a bit. What does NeighborWorks do in relation to the issue we're talking about right now, to housing? So much you do. I know you do a lot of great.
Sure. So NeighborWorks is a nonprofit community development organization that really has at its core mission creating stable, vibrant neighborhoods. And at the root of that is really addressing the housing needs of residents across the region. So for over the past 40 years, we've been working with partners like the City of Scranton, City of Carbondale, to introduce creative solutions in collaboration with residents, business owners, and municipalities to really address those housing needs. So things like home buyer assistance programs for qualified buyers, helping with down payment and closing costs, home buyer education, ensuring that prospective home buyers are well-educated consumers and understand the different stages of the home buying process and can go out into the market with confidence. Looking to prevent foreclosure. So on kind of the other end of this, really working with residents who may be in financial distress and helping them understand the steps of foreclosure and working with them to mitigate that process. But also getting into the community and doing traditional community development work where we're doing community building and engagement and working with older residents in the community on safety modifications and home repairs that allow older residents to be able to stay in their homes in a safe and dignified way.
So doing that, revitalizing neighborhood, you feel what is a first step? I mean, I think we've asked a lot of folks, in a perfect world, what would be a first step, Mayor? What do you think? Because you've both been aggressive with it, but what's a good first step?
So the first step I think we've done is that communication. We've got the people at the table that have relationships, that know each other, that trust each other. There's something kind of magical that happened in COVID where we all had to work so closely together, even more than we would have in any other situation, where we forged those relationships, we forged trust. It also helps that we had some funding, and we continue to enjoy that funding from the federal government. But we've got the relationships in place. We've got some funding in place. There's playbooks from all across the country that we're able to use. We're able to utilize resources in other areas. NeighborWorks has their partners across the country. We talk with mayors all the time across the country, but we just got to get housing built, and it's figuring out what those mechanisms are. Is it private-public partnerships? What is the funding? Is that working with our banks? Is that a CDFI that could come in and help us with those funding pieces? We have the land. We know we have great developers. We know we have great service providers and places like NeighborWorks that can help people with the home buying process. We know we have the pieces. We need to execute, and we need to figure out what that's going to look like and get those housing units started.
So you brought this up, and I kind of wanted to follow up on that. What should the role of the state and federal government be in this whole process? And is there, within the state of Pennsylvania, other state where the federal government and state and local governments are working together? You guys are being incredibly aggressive with it. What do you feel the role of the state and federal government is in this?
Yeah, it's important to note that government usually doesn't build housing, right? We have our housing authority, and they can build low-income housing. That's great. We want them to build more of that. But the level and the scope of the housing that we're talking about in Northeastern Pennsylvania, that's a private solution, I believe, aided by government funding, usually federal funding. That's HUD funding that's going to come in. It's on mayors like me to figure out how we can access more of that funding. We've been advocating at the national level as mayors to unlock more funding for our communities to build that housing. But I see it as us feeding into what is inherently a private process, right? As the city of Scranton, I'm not building this housing. I don't own this housing. We don't have the capability to do that. We do have access to federal funding. We have, zoning and rental registration, code enforcement, all the pieces where we want to make it easy to build that housing, but build it to a very high standard. We want the zoning to be in place that we can infill some of these places and make our city work better, make it more dense without compromising quality of life.
Zoning is essential in this process, and it can really be a catalyst for change when we look at solutions that are win-win, both for the community as well as for the other partnering organizations, whether that be a developer, whether that be an organization like NeighborWorks. I think there are other things that we can do to incentivize the process. So we can look at ways that we can adjust fees, whether that's permitting fees, water hookup fees, sewer hookup fees. We can look at direct funding. So, there are a number of ways that we can look at a layered approach that makes the process more conducive to attracting housing developers into the area, and really creates, an environment that fosters collaboration in that process.
Well, it's interesting you say maybe it's a good time to pose this question in because we have a time constraint, which I hate because we could talk all day on this subject.
I don't want to say that
easily. But you touched on this a little bit, Shane, Merrick, not you, but NIMBYism. We hear that all the time. We've seen some projects. The community reaction hasn't been probably very positive. So I'll give you both. Mayor, how do you feel? How can we combat that, the NIMBYism piece?
Right. We need to show people that adding townhomes or small apartments to a neighborhood is not infringing on their freedoms. It's not, making their quality of life degrade. That's not what's going to happen. So we need these smaller projects to start coming online, and we're seeing some of that in Scranton. People can feel it and say, oh, right, there is a new apartment building around the corner, and yeah, my family's still happy. I still have a great, housing property value. I'm still living the same life that I lived before, if not even better, because my taxes aren't going up because there's more people paying into the system. So there's a virtuous circle, I think, that is created, but we have to start small.
You mentioned something before that I think is really fundamental to this, is really the importance of relationship. And I think really helping people see solutions that have really been win-win, both for communities, for renters, homeowners, landlords, really that everybody has a stake in the success of that type of a model is really critical. So you have the communication piece, but then you also have the collaboration. And there's an element there that's about listening to residents and really understanding what looks like success to our communities. And then that kind of comes together and builds connection. So, the communication, the collaboration, builds connection. And when we're deeply connected to our communities, which really is the work of community building and engagement, I think the ultimate outcomes will be more widely supported and actually championed by residents in the community.
Well, Mayor Cognetti, Shane Powers, you've really made a complicated subject a little bit easier for us to understand. So thank you so much for being with us. And we'll be right back with more from NEPA Focus.
Chris, our program today shines a light on the situation here in Northeast Pennsylvania regarding workforce and affordable housing. What are the next steps?
So the Pocono Mountains United Way, in conjunction with the Pocono Mountains Visitors Bureau, has been really kind of looking into this over the last 2 years in the counties of Carbon, Monroe, Wayne, and Pike. We discovered very quickly that this is a situation that is pervasive throughout all Northeastern Pennsylvania, really throughout rural Pennsylvania. So one of the things that we decided to do was come up with some type of draft plan that we wanted to present to the folks in the community who would be responsible for doing something about this problem. And we scheduled a summit titled More Front Doors. That'll take place at Kalahari on November 20th. And at that summit, we hope to be able to present some type of draft plan to everybody within our communities that really would have to collaborate and work together to pull off some type of change in housing. We're calling this summit More Front Doors. So we're excited to present a draft plan and to bring everybody to the table to work together as a community to start a solution to our housing issues in Northeastern Pennsylvania.
A lot of great information on today's program, and I hope our viewers got something good out of this, and look forward to our next adventures here on NEPA Focus. Chris, thanks.
Thanks, George. Thanks for watching.